society is now shaping our brains to be less attentive, more impulsive, more impatient. People with ADHD are not very good at patience. They're not very good at waiting. We're really impulsive. We live in the moment. We live now.
Hey everybody, this is Robbie and I'm here with my co-host Francesca Stutley, and you're listening to This World is Mental. Today's guest, we're honored to have Kim Raine, who does extensive work with ADHD, especially for women in business. Kim is a former personal trainer, and her story is quite interesting, how she made the transition from the physical side of health to the mental side. So let's get her in here.
Mental stories and mental outcomes. You're listening to This World is Mental with your hosts, Robbie Thompson and Francesca Stutley.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on.
Hi Kim, very welcome. So we'd like to know, what is ADHD and what is ADD? What's the difference? What are they?
So nowadays, there's only ADHD. So there is no ADD. So what you have now is you have three types of ADHD. So you have ADHD, predominantly hyperactive type, which is most common in children and men. So that is the type that is your traditional ADHD. So that is the, it's very physical. You can see it. You know, it's the child that's struggling to sit still in the classroom. It's in men. It's just that need to keep physically moving. Then we have ADHD inattentive type, which is your ADD, your old ADD. And the difference here is you have the same symptoms cognitively, but with less of the physical hyperactivity. But it's still called ADHD. The H in ADD is about the hyperactivity. It's cognitive. That's like the racing thoughts, overwhelm, and can lead to the anxiety and stuff like that. So
we just want to clarify, what's the A and what's the D stand for, and the H? ADHD. So it's attention deficit
hyperactivity disorder.
Yeah, great. Just to clarify that. Yeah.
And I mean, rewinding it all back, I mean, it's just, it's such a big topic these days. And I think we were just briefly scratching the surface right before we hit the record button.
Yeah.
It seems like, people my dad's age, people that grew up in the 70s, they were just considered slow or hyperactive.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was this epiphany in the early 2000s, I would think that, oh my gosh, this is actually something that can be diagnosed, and it's prevalent amongst the public at this moment, and very prevalent. I mean, and then I didn't even know about the nuances of inattentiveness and of how it can affect different genders and such. Yeah. That's just incredible, and it's cognitive, but it displays itself as physical. This ADHD.
So I think it's like a good point though, because what's happening now is, it's like I was saying to you, like, how come everyone's suddenly got ADHD? You know, like how come we've all suddenly got ADHD? So ADHD was originally first diagnosed. It wasn't called ADHD, but back in like the early 1900s and the 1930s, it was in a few children. And then as we got to like the 70s, which will kind of go forward and then come back there, it was sort of diagnosed. So when I was at school, which was 1970, I was born in 1973, so I'm 49 at the moment. So when I was at school, and I've got ADHD, but it wasn't seen. So I was just a disruptive student, I was just a pain in the bum, really. And for me, I would sit in class and, if I had a really good teacher, and this is, like that, if we're interested in stuff, ADHD is, if we're interested in stuff, we are there. We are hyper-focused. We are excelling. We are, A students. If we're not, whoa, and you're a teacher, you're in for a tough ride, because one or two things are going to happen. If you're inattentive type, which is a lot of the females, you're going to be dreaming out the window. You're not going to be really paying much attention. Sure. You're going to get the low grades. If you are like me, which was combined type, you're going to have a child that's disruptive, because for me, I can remember like boredom is our kryptonite, because boredom, we need interest to fire up the dopamine and the neuroepinephrine. So they're the neurotransmitters in the brain that we tend to be lowering, and serotonin sometimes. So we need interest to fire those up. So if we're not interested, our brains don't get fired. And so our ADHD symptoms can be on really bad. And so for me, I'd be impulsive, so I might blurt something out. I think it would be really funny to, take my friend's pencil case and lob it or something.
Did we all have ADHD?
But that's the thing. So in those days, I was just a disruptive student. So in 1990, what happened was a few things. It was also in those days it was believed to only be in children. So in the 1990s they realised it's predominant in women as well. So and that it could go into adulthood. So then it started to become more aware of it in that way. We started to become more aware of ADD and also neuroscience in the last 10 years, but in the last 20 years has taken on leaps and bounds. So we can see in brain scans now the difference in the functional structure of the brain in ADHD.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, Kim, how did you come to realise that you were officially ADHD?
So, for me, there's a bit of a story. So I was saying to you guys, I've officially been coaching ADHD I've been coaching 17 years, officially ADHD, like when I got trained in it a year ago, unofficially 4 years ago, and unknowingly the entire 17 years, because a lot of what I was dealing with the anxiety and overwhelm was ADHD, I now realise. But for me, about 4 years ago, I was coaching a lady who was, I coach quite high-flying men and women. And this lady was the global head of talent for a big media company, like huge media company you would have heard of. Very, very successful lady. And she turned around to me one day and she was struggling with stuff, and I was helping her with health and well-being, constantly burning out. And she would have a glass of wine at night or 2 or 3 and was really beating herself up about that. Anyway, one day she said to me, she'd gone to a lecture, and she came back and said, Kim, I've got ADHD. And I, in my head, thought, what? Don't be silly. Like, you look at you're like this real high flyer, huge earner, very successful woman. And then she wrote an article about what ADHD was and working. And I'm reading it thinking, oh, that's interesting. And after that, another client I came and saw another client that was thinking that she had it. And then I started to research it. And as I started to research it, I was like, whoa, I have definitely got this. I think my daughter might have it. And I could see it in several of my other high-flying, high-achieving male and female clients.
So it's like that light bulb moment. I've heard of this moment for people. Because, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And, this wasn't around. And even if it was, a lot of parents didn't want to admit that maybe there's something wrong with their child. The trouble in school. I used to be a brat in school, throwing things, screaming, always in trouble. Yeah. Parents down at the school, all this, classic stuff. And I've played with the fact, maybe, with the thought that, do I have ADHD? And this happened recently, and I kept studying it and digging it. I almost wanted it to be true because it would just explain so much backstory for me. And I approached somebody with ADHD and I said, do you think I have this? And they're like, no, you don't. I'm like, how do you know? It's like, you just don't. You can see it, your mannerisms and this and that. And I think from my personal story, I think looking out in the world, I think there's a lot of people that are in jeopardy or embracing the fact that, they have ADHD. Have you come across any of that?
Yeah. So there's a few things that we could give you some stats. So the experts believe that 75 to 85% of people with ADHD are not yet diagnosed.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's pretty big, right? Okay. And I think the other thing that we have to get our heads round is ADHD is not, it's just a difference in our brains, okay? It's just a difference in the way that we think or the way our brains operate. So actually, and this is kind of a little bit me, a little bit stuff I've read, but if you think back, go back to our primal days in caves, etc. We needed some people that were like the go-getters, that were like, I don't care what's going to happen. I'm picking up my spear and I'm chasing that boar down or whatever it was. And then you needed the people that went, oh, hang on a minute, be careful. I'll stay here and I'll make the fire and make sure that it's all organised. So actually, for my sort of thoughts, and I know other people think this, that actually maybe we just have different brains for part of our survival. So that's the first thing I think we need to get our heads around, is that, and then of course the world gets created by what we call neurotypical people who are really organised and So that's the first thing, is that I think lots and lots of people do have different brains that are, in inverted commas, neurodiverse and different. And the other thing is, you're going to have to remind me of your question, because one thing with ADHD is not great working memory. So we forget things.
I think it's like chasing the dopamine. Like, where do you want the conversation to lead? Like, what's the interest kind for you? Yeah, totally get it.
But the other thing is, so, I definitely think, like I said to you, I think people maybe listening to this by the end will think, oh, I think I've got ADHD, because actually society is now shaping our brains to be less attentive, more impulsive, more impatient. People with ADHD are not very good at patience. They're not very good at waiting. We're really impulsive. We live in the moment. We live now, so we're not great at looking forward as to what's going to happen.
I think as well, nowadays for children learning and studying, they have all this social media that's like 10 seconds, all these kind of reels and everything else. I have no idea how they pass exams these days, where they have to sit in a room for an hour or two and try and study. It must be almost impossible. But it's quite interesting, like you talk about a normal brain, everybody thinks they're different. Is it genetic? Okay.
And that's the other thing. So ADHD is highly, highly, highly hereditary. So if you have a child with ADHD, another reason that everyone suddenly has ADHD is children are getting diagnosed much earlier and much quicker. I have to just say, as a side note, as boys are still 4 to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed in the early years than girls, because girls, we'll talk about that in a minute, the difference in presentation. But what's happening is, if you have a child with ADHD, you're 24 times more likely as a mother, one study showed, to have ADHD yourself. So it is, again, I've heard anything from 70 to 90% from the experts, it's hereditary.
We'll get right back into that topic in just a moment. Sometimes the night before doing one of these podcasts, I find it hard to sleep. I don't know what it is. I'm anxious. My mind's all over the place. So that's why I use CBD oil. PureOrganicCBD.com right now is giving 20% off first-time customers by using the promotional code 20podcast. Just go to PureOrganicCBD.com, go to checkout, and put in code 20podcast for your 20% discount. All of their products are produced in Switzerland. They're all BioSwiss certified organic. And you know what? They're my favorite brand of CBD oil out there. All right, now back to the podcast. ADHD, when I was growing up, people would take Adderall, some kind of medication, Ritalin, Adderall, and people would make jokes about it, the different brand names of the medication. But I know I had a friend that was diagnosed with ADHD. Back then it was ADD. But they were diagnosed, and I loved hanging out with that friend. He was spontaneous, he was hyper, he was a troublemaker. He was just like a
great
laugh.
fun. They're brilliant fun.
Oh my God, so funny. He started taking his medication like a zombie. He was like a completely different person. Couldn't provoke any smile out of him. And years later, he went to the Air Force. Years later, I think he had complications with his medication and his career path, I guess. And he was told to go back on it. He thought he'd overcome all the classic, symptoms of this. And he let me know that he felt a bit of grief and regret that he had to take medication to be productive in the world. And I've heard this story from a couple people actually, and I was wondering if there's any kind of message, like, is this something anybody should feel ashamed of? I mean,
wow, no. Okay, I'm going to try and stay on point, but there's so much I want to say about this, because this is what I'm really, really passionate about. Is, like I say, when the reason I got diagnosed and ADHD come into my world was because my high-flying clients, and I'm talking, 6 and 7 figure entrepreneur business owners. One of my clients has got 6 to 7 figure business owners that she runs. She's not even 35 yet. They are phenomenal people. But what I get a lot is messages from women and mothers that say, I think my son's got ADHD, or I think I've got ADHD, but I don't know about getting a diagnosis because I don't really want the label. And to my mind, actually it's that fear of that stigma and that label holds people back from getting the help that they can have. Okay. And the other thing is when clients get diagnosed, so I've been in this transition of having worked with clients for health and wellbeing and mindset and burnout and anxiety and all of these things that are big ADHD symptoms. And so I was like, okay, I think I'm not a psychiatrist. But I have developed what I call an ADAR. I can pretty much pick it up. You see behind the scenes as a coach. And so I've helped quite a few clients get a diagnosis, and there is a real grief around that diagnosis because, at my age, I was diagnosed at 47 and I've had a really good life. I've been okay. But for some people, their life has been catastrophically chaotic. They have, ADHDers are not great with money because we're impulsive. So two of the biggest ADHD traits are for impulsivity is spending and eating. So there's a lot of grief around that. There's then what you say with your friend with the medication. And I think that's come on a really long way.
Sure.
And I am a big, and I used to be my children laugh at me because I wouldn't even let them have paracetamol when they were ill as kids. I was really anti-meds. But now I've seen, and it was watching some of my clients go on medication that was like, wow, this is actually filling in that missing piece of the puzzle for them.
Right.
But if you grow up maybe not being diagnosed because your mum doesn't want you to have a label or because you believe there's a stigma around it, there's also a lot. I mean, like they reckon 70 to 80% of people in prison are either ADHD or undiagnosed ADHD. So it can go either way.
Wow.
So we have to focus on the strengths of ADHD rather than the things. Sorry.
And that's exactly where I wanted it to go. I think you hear about the negatives, in the media, and it's just amazing when you see people like, some of the business leaders that you've helped code, when they embrace that superpower that ADHD gives them.
Yeah.
And really, like you said, it can go either way. They can end up in prison, they could try to lead a normal life, or they can just be this incredible icon in the business sector or beyond. What are some of the superpowers that ADHD people have?
So our brains don't think linearly. So we don't have these. So there's a really one of the top doctors in this, guy called Ed Hallowell, describes our brains as having their Ferrari engines with bicycle brains. Our bicycle brakes. Sorry, our brains go so fast that we struggle to put the brakes on. So if we learn to help them put the brakes on, that's when you can start really using the amazing sides of it. So you're really driven. You're really focused. You think outside the box. It's the ADHDers who are the creative. I mean, they're massive creative. So, Richard Branson, Elon Musk is definitely neurodiverse, Bill Gates, and like whatever you think of those people, they are leaders of, phenomenal things. We can, the hyper focus means that we can create. I mean, we can do a week's work in 3 hours if we are interested. So
you kind of want to be ADHD.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is when you get into it, it's like, no, you can't have it. It's ours. Who wants to be organised and really good at filing when you could be out there living this phenomenal life? But if you don't give yourself or your children the opportunity to actually just get that understanding of how their brain works, then maybe what happens, and this is a really important point, is if you think, as most of my clients do who are getting late diagnosed, because like you say, in the 70s and 80s, who had ADHD, so we weren't getting diagnosed. So you think the playing field's level. You think everyone's got the same brain as you, and you think everybody struggles to get organised. Everybody's, struggles to be late. Everybody burns out easily. Everyone, doesn't pay parking fines or can't file their taxes or etc. And so you have this constant feeling in your head of like, I'm not good enough.
Not good enough. Yeah.
What's wrong with me? Oh, why can't I do it? And what happens is they get this self-talk that says, I need to work harder. I need to do a bit more. Because I was just told at school, you just need to work a bit harder, Kim, because I would have some lessons where I would be, top of the class, phenomenal. Other lessons were like where I would just be, because I either wasn't interested or I didn't have an interesting teacher. So I just got told, look how clever you are. You just need to try harder. So you try harder, but things that your brain is never, ever, ever going to be able, never, ever going to be able to excel at. And that sounds a bit downy, but that's probably the truth. But rather than focus on the things we can't do, if you're brought up to go, but look at what you can do, Kim, you can do this, you can speak for England, but you can do all these things, you grow up feeling empowered rather than feeling I'm not good enough. So it's a huge thing.
So how do you coach someone with ADHD, Kim? How do you help them, and what can you do to help? If somebody thinks they're ADHD, is it a doctor's diagnosis?
So the diagnosis at the moment is very, it's kind of anecdotal really. So it's, a psychiatrist, diagnosed by a psychiatrist, but what they will do is they will...
so it's not a medical doctor?
So a doctor will refer you.
Right. Okay.
And then you go, and there's lots of private clinics that you can go to get a diagnosis. But getting a diagnosis opens you up to, you can get medication if you want it or if you need it. And that sort of thing. So, a diagnosis will be family history. If anyone in your family has ADHD, that's a big red flag. And I've heard a lot of clients whose children have been diagnosed, and the psychiatrist turns around and goes, so which one of you two have got ADHD? And the parents are like, what?
Whoa, yeah.
And then they're like, oh, hold on a minute. And so that's the diagnosis. For me, how I coach clients, and like I said, I've been unknowingly doing this for 17 years. And I think why, for me, ADHD has been a problem. At times I could tell you lots of like nightmare stories, but also I did a lot of the things that really helped the ADHD brain. And that was, I was exercised regularly, 3 to 5 times a week. I didn't eat processed foods. I'm not a saint. I don't believe in being a saint, but ultimately most of what I eat is good, healthy nutrition. I was brought up by parents who let me be myself. So I wasn't shamed, really. That's a big thing.
Have you ever suspected that diet could be part of, or at least exacerbating the symptoms a bit more? I
think that you've hit the nail on the head there. So definitely, ADHD is structural differences in our brains, and structurally there's differences in the brains, there's chemical differences in the brains. It's not caused by diet. However, it is what exacerbated by it. And I actually think that, when we talk about the 70s and 80s where, you didn't really hear of ADHD, I think also we lived lives that actually helped ADHD stay a lot more dormant.
Sure.
These differences in our brains wasn't really as much of a problem because we weren't constantly fueling, pouring petrol on the problem. We weren't eating fast food. We weren't, as sedentary. We were exercising, like 15 to 20 minutes of exercise a day gives you 3 to 4 hours of focus. It's the, medication, really great, but the saying is pills don't make skills. So, if you go on medication, you then go and learn the skills to help you manage your ADHD. So we're definitely exacerbating the problem.
And this ties in directly with, Fran, what you do. I mean, you're...
Yeah,
You're
I think that
basically like a
nutrition,
nutritionalist.
nutritionalist.
Like amazing.
But I think nutrition affects everything, affects our moods. And I just think so many people live on a lot of sugar. And I've had a problem with sugar in the past, but sugar and all the colorants and everything else, it affects your brain. You're on charge, you're on go, and then you drop. And I can only imagine for a child that can't focus or is bored and they're driven on sugar as well. There's sugar in so many things that it must really affect their performance. You know, it affects our performance as adults. So,
and think also like what you do, the yoga and everything.
Yeah.
So the cerebellum, it's been shown that yoga or balancing postures really help ADHD in kids. So a lot of children now, the people that are wise are treating children and they're putting them on these balance programs. They've taken physical education down in schools. There's more video games. Kids come in and play on their video games. I mean, we didn't play on a video game. We were out until the street lights came off.
Right. Yeah. 100%. No, exactly.
and you might have a Milky Way once a day. You might have a treat of chocolate, but generally it wasn't as widely available.
No,
and then come the 80s and 90s, everything goes a bit bonkers.
The fast food explosion.
And there's our giveaway sound for this week. We have Kim Raine's new book, Amazon bestseller, Square Pegs, her book on ADHD. All you have to do is go to our website, www.thisworldismental.com, click on the link, leave a review, and you'll be entered to win the prize, a signed copy from Kim.
Now, back to our show.
So, Kim, if you have ADHD as a child, does it change as you go into adulthood, or does it stay with you? Does the intensity of it change? How does it affect your transition from a child to an adult?
So, definitely the hyperactivity in most people drops down. The physical hyperactivity in adulthood drops down, and it can be and tends to become more cognitive. So this as well is why I think, the anxiety. So what happens in an ADHD brain is, and one of the reasons that people can be such amazing entrepreneurs and so make such change in the world is when you have cognitive hyperactivity, you have this drive that pushes you forward, and it's like you've never done enough. You always want to do a bit more. A lot of my clients say to me, they'll stay up late because by the end of the day, they still haven't done enough. They want to do a bit more. So you always want to do a bit more. So it definitely turns more cognitive in adulthood. There are times, particularly in a woman, 3 times in their lives where ADHD, and this is the other thing for me, I'm 49, so it's hormones. Puberty for any child with ADHD is a minefield because you've got these surges of, for boys, testosterone, which makes them more boisterous, maybe more aggressive, more impulsive. And for girls, the estrogen and everything that's coming in. So puberty's tough for any ADHD child. And then for a woman, just after you have a baby, all the hormones that help you out. So estrogen is a really cognitive hormone. Estrogen is, if you look at the brain, there's estrogen receptors all over our brains. And so for women, just after having a baby, certain times in the month, at the second part of your menstrual cycle, and in peri to post-menopause, when estrogen drops down, this is what happened to me. Suddenly, my ADHD symptoms, that's why I went and got my own diagnosis, was because I wanted to do it for the work that I do, but also my symptoms became really more difficult. Like I couldn't focus on one thing. I couldn't remember things, which is very much menopause anyway.
People put that down to menopause, don't they?
Yeah,
so
and I think it can be menopause, but this was like, I was just, I could spend hours doing absolutely nothing, but thinking I'd, but been working, but have achieved nothing because I'd go from one thing to the other.
Busy fool, they call it. Busy fool.
Definitely.
An active mind. It's like I think Elon Musk said his mind's like a never-ending explosion.
Exactly.
I have some background with, with the CBD company, Pure Organic. All of our articles are researched in-house. We all write them here, the staff and myself. And it just focuses on CBD for ADHD.
Yeah.
Right. And there's loads of studies going on. They say, things like natural like CBD or other things. Some people I know smoke pot just to, to calm it down. But is there any things to look out for when it comes to ADHD and your physical health? I know your background to get into where you are today at this high level, doing and coaching people through ADHD, started as a trainer. Is that right? Physical trainer.
Yeah. So I started off as a personal trainer. And like I say, I think that massively helped me manage my ADHD, because exercise is the second most effective thing that you can do. And maybe the first if medication doesn't work for you. You've got to find the right medication. But so I think that the physical effects can be high levels of eating disorders are found to be there. But really physically, it mainly is the hyperactivity in terms of physical. And then it's quite funny because you hear of these, people say to me, I don't want to go on medication. But actually what they don't understand is they've been self-medicating for years with marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, and the 3 big things.
Sure.
So things like CBD, I think, why are they medicating with marijuana? Because it does exactly what you say. It helps calm the mind. It helps them be able to focus. But obviously, using marijuana has a really not a great effect on the brain.
Sure, yeah.
There's the pluses and minuses. So something like CBD, I think, could be, well, they're starting to say, the research coming out, that it is beneficial. Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
ADHD also, and this is really for the listener out there that might be sitting at home trying to figure out, what's wrong with me, or, am I normal? What are the tips for that? Like if somebody's just
wondering,
anxious, they go to work, they feel like they're not clicking with the group, that they're not normal, that they're never organized, like they just don't fit into their societal world at that moment.
Yeah.
What's the, if there's any tips for that listener, that would be amazing.
Yeah. How do you coach them?
I think so. The first thing is, if you think that, so I've just written a book called Square Pegs, because that's exactly what it is. It's like we are square pegs. We're never going to fit into to society's round holes. And so the people I work with are exactly that. They are feeling like, I don't quite fit in. Mm-hmm. And for me, it wasn't necessarily socially, but I was just like, why haven't I got to where I should be? Like, why do I? And all of those things. So I think the first thing is have a good look, go and really look at what ADHD is and look at the 3 different types. Because if you are a woman, or actually even now in men, if you are struggling with repeated anxious thoughts, if you overthink everything, if you lie awake at night thinking, and you just cannot switch your brain off, then lifestyle is, are you spending too long on your tech? Because that's a big thing. So with my clients, I do my best to, I have a rule: off tech by 9, bed by 10, and lights out by 10:30. Nothing in the bedroom rather than a book or some hanky-panky. But other than that, that's pretty good for ADHD as well, by the way, guys. But, no tech, no TVs, and just bring yourself, because that can really fire up the wrong parts of our brain. And the blue light is really not good for that. So getting off tech, looking at your diet, your exercise. But if you have got ADHD, a lot of people say to me, why can't I stop eating? Why can't I exercise? Why can't, you're maybe struggling to do these things even though you want to. So a lot of ADHDers are, I call them gunnoos. They're going to do this and they're going to do that, but they never quite get around to it.
I think we all know somebody who does that.
I've heard that. Also, writing that article, it was procrastination's huge with ADHD,
massive.
right?
It's massive, yeah.
And it can, procrastination in your later years, when you have a career and, you're trying to scale up your life. It can be the fastest downfall for anybody. So, going through ADHD coaching with somebody like you, and helping somebody understand, like, hey, these are the trouble points you need to look out for. You're doing great. Just keep an eye on these things, and we check in next month, next week, or whatever it is.
The first thing we do in coaching, the first thing I do with any clients is obviously get the background, find out what's going on, give some practical tips of anything I can do. So like meditation's really good, help them do everything they can in their power. But then we do, like you say, we look at their procrastination. Now, the thing is, if you're procrastinating, it's probably because you're not interested and you don't want to do the thing that you want to do. Now, like I've just told you, with ADHD, that is like kryptonite. So actually, with a lot of my clients, this whole eat that frog, have you heard about eat that frog? So you get up in the morning and the first thing you do in the morning is the big task that you've got to get out of the way today that you least want to do. That doesn't work for ADHDers, because our brain is like, I'm not doing that. I've got no, give me some fuel. So actually, I say to my guys, look, get up, put the radio on, sing your head off, dance around. If you like, eventually, whether they like it or not, I get them exercising, and in the end they're like, I can't believe you've got me doing this. But because actually focus on the outcome, not the process. But start the day, fire your brain up, do something that fills your soul. Whether it is cuddling your kids, whether it is, I love writing, so sometimes I write in the morning. Whatever it is, obviously look at what's firing up your soul. If you're using things to get yourself a dopamine hit that aren't great, smoking, drinking, eating, alcohol, shopping, sex, porn for a lot of ADHD guys, these are things that actually, they are firing up your brain, but they're not great.
They're not feeding your soul.
No, and you're getting stuck in that hyper focus, because you can get hyper focused and impulsive. So start your day, feed your soul, do something that absolutely you love, whatever it is. It might be knitting, whatever. Have some fun. Set an alarm Because if you've got ADHD, you don't want to find that, it gets to 2:00 in the afternoon, you spend the whole morning knitting and done nothing. But,
I have a jumper at the end of it.
Exactly. Spend the first 30 minutes of your day doing something. And then with procrastination, it's particularly if you've got ADHD, it's breaking down the task, and we struggle to get going. Once we're going, we're actually usually okay. So, it's like Fran did a reel for me a minute ago before we came in here about helping my guys with some balance poses and yoga, because yoga's great. But most ADHDers are like, I can't do an hour and a half of yoga. That's just, the thought of it is just, to commit an hour and a half of anything, like that's time. We're not good with time. So, I say to my clients, just go to your mat in the morning, just go to your mat and see what happens there. And 9 times out of 10, they'll go to me, I was on there for 3/4 of an hour, I did this, that, and then I went for a run. But if you say to them, you've got to be on your mat for an hour, no, game over. So with procrastination, say, what's the first little thing I need to do? And start on the tiny little thing.
Yeah, build it up.
Yeah.
It's like that with anything. I just think there's so much confusion nowadays with social media. We've had COVID. Am I anxious because of COVID? Everything's kind of got brushed under this, this kind of carpet of, well, we're coming out of the fog of COVID. Yeah. And of course, we're all going to be anxious about the future. Our lives, we're all really upset, the whole world. So it's very, very difficult to decide what the problem is. Am I normal? Who's normal anymore? Because I don't even know what normal is.
Who wants to be normal anyway, but who is normal?
It's true. Yeah.
Where is this person?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is there anything else, apart from being genetic, Kim, can stress trigger it? Is there anything that could trigger ADHD as well? So,
like brain trauma, brain injury can trigger ADHD. Okay. And particularly childhood trauma can trigger ADHD symptoms as well. And trauma and stress can trigger, whether it's ADHD, but certainly the symptoms, because, what happens when we get stressed, whatever your brain's like, is our prefrontal cortex, the management system, and ADHD particularly, they talk about executive functioning. And executive functioning is like the air traffic controller of your brain. It's the part that goes, okay, I've got to be to you guys to do this podcast at this time, so therefore be here, da-da-da. Whereas what happens when we are stressed, our prefrontal cortex, the part that is the home of this and does all our organising it and makes us human, just shuts down. Wow. It just shuts down because our amygdala fires up and goes, danger, 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 danger. Let's look around, let's see what's going on. And it goes into this, the fight, flight or freeze, and we can't think straight. So whether or not you have ADHD or not, when you are stressed and you are in that frame of mind, you are never going to be able to solve your problems, see solutions, and get yourself out of it, because the amygdala's job is just to go, where's the danger, where's the danger, and it is looking all the time, because it's a survival thing. So for the whole human race, really, because COVID we pretty much went through collectively, didn't we? We were all kind of struggling. We've all had this that has exacerbated these sorts of symptoms. I will just say quickly, for ADHD, if you think ADHD would have been with you as a child, so look back over your schooling, were you the daydreamer? But actually you could have been a really high achiever, but you were absolutely had, real anxiety about your exam results. You could be a really hard worker, but, did you struggle with friendships? Did you struggle with, did you struggle as a child with this stuff? And has it followed you into adulthood? And then looking if it's in your family, and then just looking at, what it really is. Mm-hmm.
So that would be great if we could just tell us the name of your book again.
So my book's called Square Pegs, a book of discovery for women with ADHD. It's actually then who have spent their lives trying to fit in, but that's quite a long tagline. So,
and then Kim, hopefully we've inspired. I think the first step, everybody with that think they may have ADHD or realize it is to admit, to own it. Like I have, and then once you own it, then there's like all these resources out there, like Kim here. Yeah. Kim, how does somebody who just listened to all of this great information, how do they reach out to you if they say they wanted to?
So I am on Instagram, funnily enough, as the ADHD Entrepreneurs Coach.
Great.
I think I'm actually a entrepreneur's ADHD coach, but my name's Kim Raine and I'm on Facebook. I also have a group called ADHD Brains in Business on Facebook, but my website is Kim Raine Coaching and you can come and find me there. And even if you're not in business, don't be put up. I have like the square pegs is not for people in business. It really is to help those women who have spent their whole lives trying, and men really. I did put it towards women because that's what my the background's really in. But I help a lot of men as well. If you've been trying to fit in, just come and find it. But you can get in touch and I can point you in a direction.
Yeah, very interesting, the explanation of it, Kim. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kim.
Thank you for having me. What a great name for a podcast as well, guys. Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to This World is Mental. This episode's proudly sponsored by Pure Organic CBD. Go to pureorganiccbd.com and use promotional code 20podcast for 20% off your first order. You can follow us on social media like Facebook and Instagram, and stay tuned here for more episodes. Thanks for listening.